movie opens with video footage from June 19th, 1990. A man named Naren is trapped inside an endless maze of yellow corridors known as the Backrooms. As he wanders the hallways looking for a way out, he finds a two-way radio and tries to call for help. He begs his team to come get him, explaining that he got separated from his group and that there is something else inside the maze with him. Naren gets no response over the radio. As he continues walking, he finds strange objects scattered around, like papers and disturbing stains on the ceiling. Suddenly, a dark figure appears in the distance. Terrified, Naren runs through the halls until he reaches a room with beach-themed wallpaper. He tries to open a door, but it is locked. The creature catches up to him and violently attacks. The footage cuts out and the TV screen goes blank. In the reflection of the dark screen, a group of scientists is seen watching the video. The story then shifts to a young girl pressing her handprint into wet cement next to her mother's. Years later, that same girl, Marie, stands watching her childhood home being demolished. Now an adult, Marie works as a therapist. One of her patients is Clark, a struggling architect who currently runs a furniture store. During a session, Mary guides Clark through a role-play exercise to confront his past. Mary plays the role of his ex-wife, Barbara. Mary has Clark relive the night their marriage fell apart. Clark recalls coming home drunk at midnight and accidentally breaking a glass in the kitchen, which brought Barbara downstairs. As the couple argue, Clark complained that he paid for everything while Barbara got to pursue her dreams, and he bitterly accused her of wanting children without being willing to take on the responsibility. While Mary, as Barbara, points out that Clark is taking out his own frustrations about failing to become a successful architect, and Barbara kicks Clark out of his own house. After the session, Clark shoots a commercial video for his furniture store, but he is left deeply embarrassed when the chair he sits on suddenly breaks. The store is already struggling with very few customers visiting. Later, an electrician meets with Clark, who complains about the strange lights flickering throughout the building. While inspecting the fuse box down in the basement, they discover 3 unusual red switches that do not seem to belong to the original electrical system. When they flip them, nothing appears to happen, but we see a light flicker in the background. That night, a drunk Clark watches his TV. Suddenly, the TV flickers with an image of a yellow room and a figure before the TV completely shuts off. When the shop's lights begin to wildly flash, he heads to the basement fuse box. Turning off the regular switches does nothing, but flipping off the 3 strange red switches causes the entire building's lights to shut down. Clark quickly flips them back on, but the lights refuse to return. Giving up, he prepares to leave the shop. Clark notices a glowing line on a wall with muffled noises behind it, and upon touching it, he is pulled into the yellowish, maze-like Backrooms. He finds a pile of furniture and discovers he can slip effortlessly back and forth between the shop and this new space. Exploring deeper, he passes a reversed stop sign and follows a loud voice, only to find a human-shaped cardboard cutout with a speaker wired attached to the cardboard through a door. Nearby, Clark uncovers a hidden compartment containing an abandoned backpack with the ID card of Naren Varn, the same man from the opening footage. Noticing that the compartment opens into a long, narrow tunnel, Clark crawls all the way through to the other side. On the other side of the tunnel, Clark comes out into a super strange room. Right there, 2 pairs of shoes and a chair are half buried and completely stuck in solid sand. The room makes no sense. One of the walls looks totally 4-dimensional, and right in the middle of the space, there is a square compartment holding some wooden chairs. Suddenly, Clark hears a loud noise coming from the tunnel he just crawled out of. Feeling like he isn't alone, he panics and runs straight into the 4-dimensional wall, which has a small door with 3 doorknobs. He struggles with it, forces it open, and crawls through. To his relief, he enters a room with the same reversed stop sign. Since he knows the way now, he heads back to the entry wall, touches the right spot, and steps safely back into his furniture shop. But he steps right back into the back rooms, grabs a stool from the pile of furniture, and pulls it through the wall into his shop. Just like that, he proves that physical items can actually be brought out of the back rooms. Meanwhile, we see a scientist somewhere else monitoring the back rooms on his TV, and he spots Clark there. In the next scene, Clark visits Mary, telling her that he found a strange, endless place called the Backrooms by stepping through a wall from his shop's basement. He shows her a rough map and explains it looks like his shop but keeps growing. Mary doesn't believe him and asks why no one else has found it. Clark says the entrance is hidden on the subfloor. Seeing how frantic frantic he is, Mary asks if he has been drinking. Clark denies it, saying he has been sober since Friday. Frustrated that she doesn't believe him, Clark promises to bring back real proof next time and walks out. After Clark leaves, we see Mary brought her mother's cement handprint from the old demolished house. After leaving the therapist's office, Clark visits the home of his employees, Bobby and Kat. Promising to pay them extra money, he asks them to help him do some research and instructs Bobby to bring his camera. The next day, Clark, Bobby, and Kat head down to the shop's basement. As Clark packs a bag with emergency supplies, then Clark shocks them by walking straight through a wall. A thrilled Bobby follows. After Bobby insists, a reluctant Kat enters the yellow space too. Once inside, the three of them begin filming everything. Following Clark, they stop at a very narrow, square-shaped opening in the floor. Clark ties one end of a rope around Bobby's waist and anchors the other end to a heavy bed. He tells Bobby to take his camera and climb down to record what's below. Downstairs, Bobby finds himself surrounded by massive piles of laundry. Suddenly, he spots a light flickering in a room and glimpses someone standing there. Terrified, he turns back, screams for them to pull the rope, and quickly climbs up in a panic. As he tries to untie the rope, something below violently yanks the rope, causing Bobby to fall back down into the opening. Due to strong force, the heavy bed is dragging forward and knocking Clark and Kat into the dark compartment. A mysterious figure drags Bobby's lifeless body away, prompting a terrified Kat to run into a side room to look for Bobby. Clark hears Kat's fading screams. Clark notices the door slowly opening and immediately dashes through a broken gap in the wall. Moments later, he emerges into a vast, completely white space. Spotting a door, Clark bursts through into another room, only to find himself in a dark room with a decorated Christmas tree. Suddenly, a tall and strange creature moves toward Clark from behind the Christmas tree. He panics and runs away as fast as he can. He ends up in another weird room that looks like a bathroom with a small pool. Right then, Clark hears Kat's voice begging him for help, but he cannot see her anywhere. He leaves his camera on a table and follows her voice to a solid wall. Surprisingly, Kat tells him she can see Clark perfectly because there is a mirror right in front of her, but Clark cannot see her at all because he is just staring at a solid wall. Suddenly, someone or something yanks Clark's camera backward. Seeing this from her side, Kat screams at him to look behind him, and the scene instantly cuts. In the next scene, Mary suddenly wakes up. Just then, her phone rings, and it goes to voicemail. It's a message left by Clark. On the recording, he tells her that he has opened the window and won't be returning. Worried, Dr. Mary drives to Clark's furniture store the next morning to look for him. Mary investigates the empty building and heads into the basement. There, she discovers a whiteboard featuring Clark's map and the portal entrance outlined in color. After watching an insect vanish directly into it, Mary steps through the wall into the back rooms. As she searches for Clark, she encounters a wall covered in a bizarre painted drawing of a monster. Clark suddenly appears, but as they hear strange noises, he violently chokes Mary until she faints. Mary wakes up tied to a chair in the dining room. Seated with them are three distorted, multi-eyed, human-like monsters created from Clark's fading memories: a woman, an obese man, and a man with a lamp in a wheelchair. To prove they are numb and function like mere furniture, Clark stabs the obese man in the neck, to no effect, then cuts open his stomach to pull out a piece of flesh that looks exactly like foam. When Clark opens the refrigerator, Mary is horrified when she discovers Kat's severed head inside. Ignoring Mary's pleas to escape, a delusional Clark demands she admit her therapy assessments of him were wrong. When she quickly agrees, he rejects the easy answer and demands they role-play the night his wife kicked him out. Mary bluntly counters that his wife didn't leave because of his drinking or long hours, but because he constantly complains, blames others, and refuses to take responsibility. Emotionally, Clark begs for a cure. When Mary admits she has none, Clark decides the Backrooms is where he truly belongs and begins to untie her so she can leave. Suddenly, a terrifyingly tall monster resembling Clark in his pirate costume appears. Clark tries to protect Mary, telling the creature she is their therapist and they can stay just as they are. Instead, the giant pirate monster lifts Clark and begins eating him alive. Mary flees through a door into a different space, only to look back and see the towering pirate monster dragging Clark's body right toward her. Mary escapes through a side door, navigating a maze of rooms and crawling through a tight space onto a high terrace. Because the monster is too large to fit through the crawl space, Mary climbs a set of stairs and opens a door, emerging into what looks like Clark's furniture store, only to realize it is another copy within the Backrooms. The monster suddenly reappears and corners her. Mary fights back, breaking the creature's leg. During the struggle, she trips over the cardboard cutout, accidentally triggering a system trap that causes nearby cylinders to leak gas, an event caught entirely on CCTV. As the gas fills the room, the monster lunges at her, sparking a desperate scuffle. Mary pulls her mother's cement handprint flashlight from her pocket, bludgeons the monster with it, and breaks free. She escapes through a small gap the monster cannot fit into, but upon reaching the other side, she is immediately surrounded by people in hazmat suits. The masked personnel spray her with gas and carry her out of the backrooms. Later, surrounded by numerous scientists and masked personnel in the facility, following her recovery, Mary is brought to a headquarters where she meets Phil, the same man we saw earlier monitoring Clark on his TV screen. Phil reveals that he works for the Async Research Institute. While developing a high-tech MRI machine, they accidentally discovered the backrooms, leading them to abandon their medical work to research the space full-time. Despite sending teams inside one by one, Phil admits they are completely clueless, describing the backrooms as an endless, non-expanding void where the further you explore, the less you find. When asked to explain her experience, Mary describes the place as a faulty copy of the real world. She asks if she will be released, but Phil notes the decision is not up to him. Meanwhile, deep inside the backrooms, the environment begins autonomously constructing new rooms that replicate Mary's own past and experiences. Structural replicas of Mary's demolished childhood home, her own home and office, Clark's store, the missing person posters for Kat and Bobby, finally, a giant, monstrous copy of Mary, featuring a deeply distorted face, completely empty of humanity and emotion. And the movie ends. And that wraps up Backrooms. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell for more chilling movie stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.